Well, thanks again for having me, and I appreciate you recognizing earlier that it is incredibly difficult to be here, not just because of the challenges of trying to hold multiple truths and acknowledge the suffering of Israeli victims of October 7th, as I also hold space for my own family and my own people who are being killed as we speak in this horrendous war started by Hamas. I also want to be clear that I'm not here to talk politics. I do a lot of politics. You can go to my Twitter or whatever. I'm here to keep the focus on the victims of October 7th, specifically the Israeli women who were victimized and abused on October 7th. I was compelled to put myself out there after I saw what was unfolding. It was October 6th here in the United States, and I knew that Gaza, as we knew it, would cease to exist. I knew this would be a horrendous disaster of epic proportions for my folks and my family and people. I was also horrified by the dehumanization of Israeli victims on October 7th, the celebration of taking women and children as hostages and relegating that to a mere act of resistance. This idea that October 7th was entirely unavoidable and that it was only a consequence of policies that Israel committed. I maintain that it was entirely avoidable and that Hamas made choices that harmed Israelis and harmed the people of Gaza. And so the main message that I want to share and offer here, again, in the spirit of keeping the focus on Israeli victims and Israeli women who were abused and the hostages as well, is that it is entirely possible to hold multiple truths, to have a focus on empathy and shared humanity, not as a kumbaya, big picture, let's hold hands and have falafels and everything's going to be fine, but actually as a pragmatic evolution that's going to help us get past one of the most horrific episodes of the Israel and Palestine conflict. And so I can feel empathy for Israeli women, I can feel sadness and horror, I can talk to Israeli hostage families as I have, I can talk to former hostages, while I also am critical of the war and the killing of my family members, children as young as 3 and 4 months old, shredded to pieces, my aunt Zainab, my uncle Abdullah, all of my family members that I grew up with, my homes being destroyed. I don't have to exclude the suffering of Israeli victims. And it's easier said than done. It takes a daily commitment. It's hard. I'm being pulled in a bunch of different directions. People on the pro-Palestine side and people on the pro-Israel side, everybody's projecting onto me what I need to be saying, what I need to be doing. And I've decided that I'm going to speak my truth, leveraging my lived experience, my contacts and connections with the Jewish community, but also my contacts with my people and my family. And I want to just be one last thing clear. It's like I never claim to speak on behalf of the Palestinians. I speak for myself. I operate solo. I have a very unique lived experience. But I can assure you that many Palestinians, maybe who are less outspoken than myself, who are afraid, who can't deal with the threats, or who are genuinely confused and don't know how to support their people, don't know that speaking out against sexual violence and rapes doesn't mean you support the war, doesn't mean you support the bombing of children in Gaza, doesn't mean you support what's happening. So there are many people that may not think exactly what I'm thinking, but they hold different bits and pieces of my views and opinions.
You know, earlier we spoke about why is it okay that Hamas, or is it okay for a lot of the Palestinian people living in Gaza, that Hamas has been using them as human shields, using children as human shields, coming through those tunnels and sacrificing their own people. So my question to you is, what is your perspective on Hamas as leadership, as a government in Gaza? And what is the plight for the Palestinian people in view of that?
Certainly, and despite being out of Gaza for many years, like I said, my immediate and extended family were there. I tried to build an internationally run Israeli-approved airport in Gaza in 2015. I have contacts and networks there and feel that I can speak from experience and actual data. And the truth is, while Hamas does in fact have a base of support that I personally would not put beyond 30%, a large number of the people of Gaza, including those who once upon a time supported Hamas, are furious with what the group has done for almost 2 decades in terms of the getting a blockade imposed upon Gaza due to their strategic choices aligning with Iran, the stealing of a lot of the Palestinian people's resources, the embedding of militant assets throughout the civilian population. That is an open secret, something that is known to the NGOs and the UN and the international community that for years, through good intentions, inadvertently enabled Hamas to entrench its control. The people of Gaza protested against Hamas in 2017 and 2019. In 2023, in July and August, right before October 7th, the people of Gaza understand that Hamas does have its infrastructure and tunnels to take care of its people, and it's stealing aid and it's stealing the supplies while they have to fend for themselves above ground. The unfortunate reality, nevertheless, is that you look at people why aren't the people in Russia and in Iran and in Belarus and in North Korea, why aren't they rising up and overturning their regimes? The reality is when you have a battered, beaten population that is also suffering from Israeli policies, also suffering from the war, but is also unarmed. And it's a combination of brainwashing, it's a combination of control, it's not a democratic society. It's very difficult to speak out. I'm in the West, I'm in the United States, and it's immensely challenging for me as somebody who holds multiple truths and balances and tries to have empathy for my own people as I'm also building bridges with Israeli and Jewish communities. Imagine how exponentially difficult that is in Gaza. And so I don't want to, my intention isn't to manufacture dissent where none exists, but it is an absolute fact that the Western media has done a horrible job of highlighting dissident voices in Gaza. There is this implicit desire almost to paint all Gazans as being behind Hamas. And by the way, and I wrote about this on Twitter, even people that normally support the resistance and the armed resistance narrative. I talked to Palestinians one-on-one who confided in me how they're absolutely horrified by the taking of women and children and how, as hostages, the treatment of even of those soldiers we saw in this video. What we didn't see in this video was a Hamas fighter bragging that these are our sabaya, which is Islamist doctrine for sex slaves. So there are many in Gaza and throughout the Palestinian territories and the diaspora, like I said, who despise Hamas, who stand against them, but they're fragmented, they're afraid, they are unable to speak out. And that's my hope, is to create a new political home where you can be supportive of our people's just and urgent aspirations for independence and peace and statehood, while also being against Hamas and Islamism.
Thank you so much. My next question is to you, Stephen. Iran and its primary proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas, are a major threat to Israel and the United States, and in fact, the entire world. What are the current threats from Iran and its proxies?
Well, thank you for having me here. Iran, a wonderful country, wonderful cultured people, unfortunately under the rule of a maniacal theocratic regime since 1979, racing toward nuclear weapons. And by the way, if the original Iran nuclear deal were still in effect, it would expire anyway next year because it expired in 2025. Racing for nuclear weapons, planting proxy groups to surround Israel with what Iran calls the so-called axis of resistance. Hezbollah in Lebanon, armed with over 100,000 missiles, rockets, cruise missiles that can strike any target from Haifa to Beersheba and everything in between. The Houthis in Yemen, armed with Iranian cruise missiles and drones, shooting at it a lot. By the way, Aqaba is right next to Eilat, and I understand unofficially that Aqaba has been saved from hits by Houthi missiles several times by the Israelis over the last few months. Iranian proxies in Iraq, right next door, in January of this year, attacked a United States military base in northeastern Jordan with drones, killing 3 U.S. service members and wounding 40, some of whom quite seriously. Is Iran a threat to Israel? Of course it is. Iran has sworn to destroy Israel. Iran saw the pieces on the chessboard, Daphna, the Abraham Accords, the negotiations last year that could have led to a deal between Saudi Arabia, Israel, the U.S., and the Palestinians, a package deal whereby the U.S. would enter into a defense pact with Saudi Arabia, the Israelis would recognize a path forward toward Palestinian statehood, and Saudi Arabia would normalize with Israel, establish diplomatic relations. The one party that did not want that to happen was Iran. And the Wall Street Journal reported shortly after October 7th that it was Iran that gave the green light to Hamas to commit these horrific crimes on October the 7th. Who has benefited from this war more than any other country? It's Iran. Iran is a threat to Israel, and Iran is also a threat to American interests. And by the way, and I'll stop here, Daphne, Iran launched hundreds of missiles and drones in Israel just a couple of months ago. We all remember that night, that horrible night. The first ever direct Iranian attack against Israel. What if one of those rockets had pierced through the Iron Dome and struck the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem? You know who would have been blamed. Not Iran. They would have said the Israelis did it. We came very close to World War III that night. That is why the United States of America is equally under threat from Iran. This is an issue that has got to be dealt with tough.
Thank you. You know, one of the questions obviously on everybody's mind is Israel is being attacked from the north, and it's always in threat of Hamas now from every direction. So what do you think is the reality in the very near future?
Daphne, I've been in Israel twice in the last 8 weeks. The mood, as many of you who have been there will verify, is very bleak. The fate of the hostages is hanging over the country every minute of every day. And while I was there, and I've been there more than 40 times in my life, I have a huge family there, for the first time I heard some of my military friends, military relatives, genuinely worried about a Hezbollah massive strike on the center of Tel Aviv, on the center of Haifa, on the heavily populated areas of Israel. The threat of a Hezbollah attack launching thousands of rockets simultaneously, which Hamas proved on October the 7th when they launched 5,000 rockets simultaneously and overwhelmed portions of the Iron Dome. What if Hezbollah were to fire 25,000 or 30 or 40,000? How many thousands of dead would we have in the populated central portion of Israel? For the first time in my life, I heard grave, grave worry about that possibility. That's different from what we had in June of 1967. It's different from what we had in October of 1973 because the very heart of Israel's civilian population is under threat. People are quite worried about that, Daphne.
Basch-Harod Khomeini to Iran. Stupid American policy. Please talk about it. You guys think whatever happened in the Middle East, we have to blame you.
Excuse me, sir, could I continue with the questions? I really appreciate your patience. Thank you. My next question is, obviously, this is very emotional for so many people around the world. But through it all, everything that we've seen on television, on media, something horrific has been growing, which is anti-Semitism, and actually increased racism as well.